last night. Some of us were up here for puzzles and potluck. We had about a dozen people, wasn't it, I believe. And we divided up into 4 teams, and we put puzzles together. And Bob and Nancy Remmert won in Dakota. They wanted me to tell you they won. I won't say how big their puzzle was compared to ours, but they win. They put it together faster. See what? Oh yeah, I wanted to kind of add to what Paula was saying a moment ago about for those of you who in future weeks or whatever don't feel comfortable coming, but you would like to receive stuff from church, like a sermon, bulletin, things like that. We already have a mailing list. We do that, so we can add you to the list. So just let the office know if you'd like for that to happen. And nothing's been mentioned about the choir. And so I'm going to leave it to you guys to determine what you guys want to do, because it does require you to be out in public and be in close proximity to one another. So I don't know if that's, you're autonomous, so you take a vote or however you want to do it. But I certainly don't want to make you feel pressured to come and not only to rehearsal, but to be here as well. So, because this all really needs to be individual choices. Until or if, we decide we cannot do this. And a lot of churches obviously have already made that decision. But in the meantime, we're trying to take precautionary measures like social distancing. I thought about standing close by, but then I thought, no, not enough social distancing between Tim and Phil here. So anyway. So now, about my sermon title out there. Doesn't it feel like we're all just sort of sitting ducks a little bit? You can see why I came up with that sermon title, or you'll see in a moment. Now, I know the odds of any of us actually contracting coronavirus at this point are very, very low. But there is a panic. You may have noticed a panic, especially if you've been in the toilet paper aisle in the supermarket. Because we've all seen the charts and we listen to the news and we see where things are increasing and we don't know how long that's going to keep going and all that. And we're all just trying to figure this out, right? So be forgiving and be humble in your connections with other people. When you may want to judge what they're doing to deal with this, but don't do that. We're all trying to figure this out. As you know, this past week, this was labeled a pandemic rather than an epidemic. And of course, the first thing we're reminded of are some pandemics from history. I read a list that's rather extensive. They included the HIV/AIDS pandemic, which killed tens of millions of people. There was the flu back in 1918, which killed tens of millions. And of course, go back to the 14th century, you had the bubonic plague, which killed anywhere from 70 to 200 million people, estimates. So hopefully it's not going to come to that, even close. But at this point, I can't really imagine what it must be like or feel like to be quarantined, like maybe on a cruise ship, or maybe you live or work in a nursing home where the virus has shown up, or maybe you live in one of those countries that, like France and Italy, that are on complete lockdown right now. I don't know what that would be like. And not to make a joke about this, but especially people that are sitting on the cruise ships must feel like they're sitting ducks in it, almost literally. That phrase, by the way, of course, originated. Any duck hunters in the crowd here today? It came from duck hunting. And as you might guess, a bird that when it takes off in flight, it's a little more difficult to shoot and kill. But if they're grounded or they're waddling around the water, sitting still, then they're much easier to kill. So the phrase "sitting duck" then became something that we used to refer to the state of being an easy target to be attacked. And I think that's how people are beginning to feel about this pandemic. We feel vulnerable to some hostile force that's out there that's beyond our complete control. And I think a lot of us feel the same way in terms of like the up and down stock market, or tornadoes, Maybe many people in St. Louis feel this way a little bit in terms of random shootings that occur. It's like you don't know where that could happen. And of course, one reason we came up with the church safety policy and will be implementing that is because we don't want to feel like sitting ducks, as much like sitting ducks on Sunday morning during worship. So I put a picture of the church site on Facebook, and one of my colleagues asked, well, how are you going to connect that to the lectionary? Because that's important. Well, pretty easy. Our reading today from Exodus chapter 17. That's what I'm going to connect it to. This reflects a situation when the Israelites felt like sitting ducks because they thought they might die first of hunger and then of thirst while they were wandering around the desert for 40 years. Now, here's the story. Under the leadership of Moses, they have just left the so-called wilderness of sin. And I know every time I read that, I think, why is it called the wilderness of sin? And I'm sure you've had the same questions. Thinking, did the people who lived in that wilderness, were they notorious sinners? Is that why they were called the wilderness of sin? No, they were not. The word is just a coincidence in the English language. The wilderness of sin is merely a geographic location that's located near Mount Sinai, and if you know the first three letters of Sinai is S-I-N, sin. So in this context, the wilderness of sin does not refer to sinfulness as we normally would say it. Instead, believe it or not, it refers to the moon. Historians suggest that sin, S-I-N, was the name of a moon god in the ancient Semite religion. And that's how they got the wilderness of sin. Maybe they thought that wilderness or desert looked a little bit like the moon. I'm not sure. But now you know what that refers to. So let's back up. Earlier in the Exodus story, we find the Israelites coming into the wilderness of sin. And this is where they first began to object that they had run out of food. And toilet paper, by the way. But they had just consumed all of the corn that they had brought with them from Egypt. And now they are very, very hungry. In fact, they're starving. And according to the story, Yahweh, their God, heard their murmurings, their complaining, and God provided them with an abundance of manna and quail, which sounds pretty yummy, right? That's what I'm having for lunch today. Come over. We're going to eat a little manna and quail. But in the reading for today, the Israelites have, they've had their bellies full, and they leave the wilderness of sin, and they come to the wilderness, or a place called Rephidim. So now they're in a situation where they've had all this food to eat, but now they need to wash it down. They need to wash down all that manna and quail, but guess what? They have no water. They've run out of water. Somebody's been hoarding the bottled water again. And so naturally they complain to the leader of this wilderness wandering, Moses, and demand that he finds water for them. Give us water to drink, they command, as if he has a bunch of canteens that he's hoarding in his tent. Shamelessly so. But no, he's not. And Moses is getting a little offended at this point by their continued lack of trust in his leadership. After all, when they threw a big fit about being hungry, guess what happened? They were fed. Manna and quail dropped from the sky. So why are they testing the Lord again? Why are they arguing with me still? Why are they doing that? Here's why. Because they feel like sitting ducks. That's why. Quote, "But the people thirsted there for water, and the people complained against Moses and said, 'Why did you bring us out of Egypt to kill us and our children and livestock with thirst? Why did you bring us out here just so we could be sitting ducks and die of thirst?' They feel like they've left the frying pan, which was Egypt, and they've gone into the fire, which is the wilderness. So they're all like sitting ducks, all of them, including their children and their livestock. And because they're such a large group with children and livestock, which slows them down, they are feeling extremely vulnerable. I'm sure they feel a little bit like the elderly people in the nursing home up there in Washington where the coronavirus hit them pretty hard. So vulnerable might be a gross understatement. Moses, again, he's dumbfounded. To use one of my favorite words, he's flummoxed. This means that he is bewildered, which is a great word to use for someone who doesn't know what to do in the wilderness. If you're going to be bewildered, it might as well take place in the wilderness. Now, that's all the wordplay I'm doing right now for today, Charlie. That's it. So Moses does the only thing he knows to do, which is ask God what to do, which happily for him is an option. I mean, he seems to have a direct pipeline to God. And so he says, hey, God, you need to help me here because I think they're going to stone me to death. You need to pitch in and help. And again, happily for him, God has another trick up the divine sleeve, another novel solution. God's already come up with the manna and the quail. Now God comes up with water from a rock. Now, if you think about it, if this wasn't the creator of the universe offering this particular solution, we might think this to be the most asinine solution in all of Scripture. I mean, come on, water from a rock? Are you kidding me? If one's looking for water, one doesn't look at a rock, maybe underneath the rock, but not at the rock. And so that kind of begs the question, why rocks? Why a rock? And here's the answer. That's all there is. Look around. This is the desert. Other than sand and dirt, you got rocks. That's it. And apparently the creator of the universe, who is also the creator of rocks and water, has a trick or two up the divine sleeve. I bet God could even squeeze blood out of a turnip. I bet so. Now, God knows that no one's going to believe Moses if he comes back to the group and says, hey guys, I managed to squeeze some water out of a rock. And so God says, why don't you take some elders with you? Because everybody will believe people with gray hair, right? You're more believable. So take them with you. And so he takes the elders with him, and he takes the same staff he used not too long before that to strike the Nile and turn it into blood. Here's the dramatic moment. While standing on a big rock at the foot of Mount Horeb, he strikes the rock with his staff, and water comes gushing out of the rock. The astonished elders witness the whole thing, and once again, they are wrong about being sitting ducks, and they are glad that they're wrong. You gotta love Moses' response to all this. Think of everything he's been through. Put yourself in his shoes. Of course he's overjoyed. He's probably thirsty as well. And he doesn't have to worry about them critiquing his leadership and all that. But Moses, to me, reveals that he has a little passive-aggressive side to him. Because he decides to give this place where water comes out of a rock, not just one name, but two names. He's like, I'm dubbing this place, number one, Massa, which means testing, because they put God to the test. And I also dubbed this place Meribah, which means quarreling, because they tend to quarrel with me quite a bit, Moses thinks. You see how that might be a little passive-aggressive for him to name that place, those two names? This is a great story, and it really is no coincidence that it is always read during the season of Lent. Because this is a season designed for our spiritual wilderness wandering. This is a season of spiritual hunger and thirst. And maybe even a season of testing and quarreling with God. Lent is not a season for the faint of heart. Not if we're doing it right. not if we're doing it right. It is a season for those who acknowledge and accept their vulnerabilities, which not everyone is capable or willing of doing. But that's who the season of Lent is for those who are willing to acknowledge and accept their vulnerabilities. It is a season designed specifically for spiritual sitting ducks, for those who are willing to sit still in a state of spiritual honesty, authenticity, and therefore vulnerability. That's what this is for. So if we're not feeling vulnerable right now, we're not in Lent. If we're not thirsty, we're not in Lent. And if we're not thirsty, we might as well take down these purple paraments of Lent and replace them with the green paraments of ordinary time. I was thinking the other day that this coronavirus, as unwanted as it is, at least had the wherewithal to come during the season of Lent. And I'll tell you why. Just as the people complained in Moses' day that, hey, we made it this far only to die from hunger and thirst in the desert, well, now humanity is complaining, rightly so, that we have made it this far to be the most technologically and medically advanced civilization in the history of the world, and yet, here we are, we feel like sitting ducks, helpless, vulnerable. And no one wants to be vulnerable, physically or spiritually. And yet it is good to be reminded that, no, we are, always. Because awareness of our vulnerabilities is the only way to remain or become healthy. Awareness of our vulnerabilities is the only way to remain or become healthy. So the vulnerability of Lent is one of the most powerful antidotes to spiritual sickness. Lent is our inoculation shot against spiritual unhealthiness. It compels us to sit still and roll up our sleeves and take God's needle. It helps us to learn to trust the Creator of the universe as we walk through, yes, the wilderness of sin. And by that, I mean sin.